Okay, welcome to Seven Continents, One Story, and I genuinely cannot wait for this one.
Glad to have you with us today. This is going to be a good one.
I've been looking forward to this all week, honestly.
I'm Ethan, 13 Maltese, and way too obsessed with history for someone my age.
I'm Niels, professor of history, originally from Sweden.
And I'm Celine, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland. I read far too many history books in my spare time.
Every episode, we go deep into a story from one of the seven continents. Ancient stuff, modern stuff, stories that actually change the world.
Stories that deserve to be told properly, not just as a footnote in a textbook.
Because history is full of moments that still echo today if you know where to look.
History just hits different when you know the full story. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi, Nils. Hi, Ethan. So good to be here again. How are you both doing?
I'm great. I'm really excited about today's topic, honestly. I've been reading about it all week.
Wonderful. I can feel this is going to be a special episode. There's something about Australian history that just captures the imagination.
Well, you're not going to keep us in suspense, are you? What are we exploring today?
Today, Celine, we're exploring the moment when 6 separate countries became one nation in a single day. Imagine that.
Wait, 6 countries became one on a single day? How is that even possible?
That's exactly what we're going to discover together. Let me begin with a mystery. I have something in the studio with me today. It's a structure. Not a building, exactly. Something temporary. Something made of materials that would normally be used for something completely different.
Something temporary? What do you mean, made for something else?
Imagine trying to build something grand, something ceremonial, something historic. But you only have 2 years to keep it standing. What material would you choose? What if I told you that you'd use the same plaster that bakers use for decorating wedding cakes?
Wait, you're serious? Like actual cake decorating plaster?
Not exactly cake plaster, Ethan. Fibrous plaster of Paris. The same basic material. And here's the thing. This structure stood only about 2 years before it had to be completely removed because the material was degrading so rapidly.
So we're looking for a structure made of plaster that was only meant to last briefly, but it turned out to be one of the most important moments in history.
Precisely. And not just important, it was the moment when an entire nation was born. A moment attended by 60,000 people. A moment where the fate of an entire continent changed forever.
Okay, so what was this building? Where was it? When did this happen?
Sydney, Australia, New Year's Day, 1901. A ceremony in Centennial Park. But before we get to the building, we need to understand why 6 separate countries even needed to become one nation in the first place.
6 separate... Wait, you mean 6 different countries had been living in Australia?
Not countries in the way we think of them today, but 6 British colonies, each with its own government, its own laws, its own defense force, even its own railway system, with different gauges so trains couldn't even travel between the colonies.
That's so weird. So, like, you couldn't just travel from one part of Australia to another?
Imagine being Australian but living in Victoria. To send something to a cousin in New South Wales, you'd have to change trains at the border. Trade goods would have to be unloaded and reloaded. Even building one unified railway across the continent was impossible because no one could agree on which gauge to use.
That sounds incredibly inefficient.
It was, but that's not even the main reason they decided to federate. The real reason involved fear of invasion.
Invasion from who?
Germany, Japan, the powerful European nations expanding into the Pacific. The 6 Australian colonies looked at the map and realized they were isolated, small, separate, and potentially vulnerable.
So they thought if we unite, we'll be stronger?
Exactly. A unified nation with a unified defense force, a unified economy, a unified voice on the world stage. But getting 6 separate colonies to agree on anything turned out to be nearly as difficult as defeating an invading army.
So how did it even happen? How did they convince everyone?
It started with one man, one speech. On October 24th, 1889, in a small town called Tenterfield, New South Wales.
Tell us about this speech. Who gave it?
A man named Sir Henry Parkes. He was the Premier of New South Wales. And at the Tenterfield School of Arts, he stood up and delivered what would become known as the Tenterfield Oration. It was a call to arms, but without any armies.
A call to arms? What does that mean?
It means he was calling people to action, right? Asking them to do something important?
Precisely. Parkes stood up and said something revolutionary for his time. He said, Why should we not form on this Australian continent under the Southern Cross, a great national government for all Australians?
Oh. Oh, he was asking people to imagine themselves as part of one nation, as Australians, not just New South Welshmen or Victorians.
Exactly, Ethan. And here's what made this moment so crucial. Before Parks's oration, federation was something politicians discussed in private meetings and parliamentary chambers. But Parks took the idea directly to the people. He gave that speech 15 times in 9 months, traveling across different colonies, asking ordinary Australians to imagine something that had never existed before.
So he was the first person to actually ask regular people to support federation, not just politicians talking to politicians?
In a very real sense, yes. Parks became known as the father of federation, though, as it turned out, he didn't live to see the moment of federation itself. He died in 1896.
Oh no, so he never got to see what he started?
No. But his words had already set something in motion, something that no one, not even Parks himself, could have stopped.
So what happened after Parks gave his speeches? Did everyone just immediately agree to federate?
If only it were that simple, Celine. There was a process, conventions, committees, negotiations that lasted more than a decade.
Oh man, really more than 10 years?
In February 1890, just a few months after the Tenterfield Oration, the Australasian Federation Conference was held in Melbourne. Delegates from all the colonies met and agreed that federation was actually possible. They called for a national convention to draft a constitution.
A constitution, so they had to write the rules of this new nation.
Exactly, and not just any constitution. They had to blend two different traditions of government, the British system, which they all knew, with the American federal system, which divided power between a central government and individual states.
Why would they use the American system? I thought they were British.
Because the American system was the only working example of how to keep a central government strong while also letting individual states keep power over local matters. The person who made this work was a brilliant constitutional designer from Tasmania named Andrew Inglis Clark.
Andrew Inglis Clark. I've read about him in my research. He was incredible.
He was. Clark understood that Australia needed something unique, not purely British, not purely American, but a blend of both traditions. He drafted the Constitution at the First National Australasian Convention in Sydney in March 1891. 46 delegates from the 7 colonies gathered to approve his work.
7 colonies? I thought there were 6.
New Zealand was involved initially, but they eventually decided not to join the Federation. That's another story entirely. But the 6 Australian colonies, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, and Tasmania, they stayed committed to the process.
But getting 6 colonies to agree on anything must have been nearly impossible. What were they arguing about?
Money, primarily. The larger colonies, especially New South Wales, were worried about losing revenue if they had to share customs and excise duties with the smaller colonies.
Customs duties are taxes, right? On goods coming in and out?
Exactly. Right now, if you want to sell something from Victoria to New South Wales, you have to pay a tax. After Federation, those taxes would go to the central government instead of staying in each colony.
So the richer colonies didn't want to share their income with the poorer colonies?
And the poorer colonies didn't want to lose their independence. It took 2 more conventions in 1897 and 1898 to finally hammer out a compromise.
So they had to meet 3 times before they could agree on the Constitution?
3 formal conventions, but countless informal meetings and negotiations in between. By 1897, they made some crucial compromises. One of them was called the Barton Clause.
The Barton Clause? What was that?
It guaranteed that the 6 states would receive 75% of customs and excise revenue from the new central government, at least for the first 10 years. This made the smaller and more dependent colonies willing to join.
So they basically said, okay, you keep most of the tax money, but you also have to be part of one nation?
That's essentially it. They also agreed that the new federal capital would be built in New South Wales, but it had to be at least 100 miles from Sydney, so New South Wales couldn't dominate the capital.
So the compromises were about finding ways to keep everyone happy. New South Wales gets the capital city, but can't control it. Every state gets to keep most of the tax revenue. Everyone gets protection because they're unified.
You've just summarized the entire constitutional negotiation process, Celine. Federations are built on compromise.
But this is still before anyone voted, right? Like, the people hadn't actually agreed to this yet?
Correct. Once the Constitution was drafted, it had to go to a referendum. The people of each colony would vote yes or no.
When did the referendums happen?
The first referendums were held in June 1898. New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria all voted on the proposed constitution.
And did they all vote yes?
3 of them did, but New South Wales had a special requirement. They needed at least 80,000 yes votes, which was equivalent to roughly half of all enrolled voters. That's a very high threshold.
So even though most people voted yes in New South Wales, the number wasn't high enough?
Exactly. The Federation movement nearly died right there in 1898. In New South Wales, the majority wanted federation, but not by a large enough margin.
So what happened? Did they just give up?
No. In January 1899, the colonial premiers did something controversial. They held a secret conference.
A secret conference? They were keeping secrets from their own people?
Not exactly secrets in the criminal sense, but they met privately to address the concerns that had come up during the referendum campaign. They made amendments to the draft constitution to address New South Wales's worries and Queensland's reservations.
What kind of amendments?
They adjusted the clause about tariffs. They clarified where the capital would be located. They made the federal system seem safer and more stable to the larger colonies. Then, in June 1899, they held second referendums in the same colonies, plus Queensland voting for the first time.
And this time?
This time, all 5 colonies approved the revised constitution. The yes votes were overwhelming. The people had spoken.
So everyone was united now? Everyone wanted federation?
Almost everyone. Western Australia still hadn't voted, and Western Australia was a problem.
Why was Western Australia a problem? What was different about it?
Western Australia is the most isolated part of the continent. It's thousands of miles away from the eastern colonies. There were no railways connecting it to the east. There wasn't even a transcontinental railway planned. The Western Australians were genuinely afraid that joining the Federation would make them even more isolated, more vulnerable, and that they'd be dominated by the richer eastern colonies.
That sounds like a reasonable fear, actually. If you're far away from everyone and you join a group, you could lose power pretty easily.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly how the Western Australians felt. Some of them seriously opposed federation. But then something happened that changed everything.
What changed?
Gold. In the 1890s, Western Australia experienced a massive gold rush. Fortune seekers flooded into the colony from the eastern states. They were called T'othersiders, people from t'other side of the continent.
T'othersiders? That's a funny name.
It is, but these T'othersiders brought something with them. They brought ideas. They brought enthusiasm for federation. They'd lived in the eastern colonies and seen what was possible. They wanted to be part of a unified nation.
So the gold rush changed Western Australia's population and changed their attitudes toward federation?
Precisely. The demographics of Western Australia completely shifted. Suddenly, there were tens of thousands of settlers from the east who brought with them federation sentiment. On July the 31st, 1900, Western Australia held its referendum.
And?
44,800 yes votes versus 19,691 no votes. More than twice as many yes votes as no votes. Western Australia had voted to join the Federation.
So even the most reluctant colony was convinced by new settlers arriving and sharing their vision of what unity could mean.
But there was still one more hurdle. The Constitution had to be approved by the British Parliament and signed by the Queen.
The British Queen, really?
Remember, this was 1900. Australia was still a British colony. The 6 colonies were British colonies. Creating a new Commonwealth required British approval. A delegation, including representatives from 5 colonies and an observer from Western Australia, traveled to London in March 1900 to present the Constitution to the British Parliament.
And did the British Parliament approve it?
Yes. On July 5, 1900, the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act was passed. And on July 9, 1900, Queen Victoria herself granted royal assent. She signed the document that created Australia as a nation.
Queen Victoria signed it, so she literally authorized the creation of Australia as a nation?
With her signature, Australia ceased to be a collection of 6 separate British colonies and became the Commonwealth of Australia. But the Constitutional Act didn't take effect immediately. It was proclaimed on January 1, 1901.
So the actual day that Australia became a nation was New Year's Day, 1901?
January 1st, 1901, and not just any January 1st, it was the start of a new century, the start of a new millennium. The Australians believed they were stepping into a glorious future, and they decided to mark this moment with an unforgettable ceremony.
This is where the pavilion comes in, right? The structure you mentioned at the beginning?
Yes, now we arrive at Centennial Park in Sydney. The year is 1901, New Year's Day. Imagine you're one of the 60,000 people gathering in the park. The morning is warm. It's midsummer in Australia. The park is filled with bunting and flags. The grass is crowded with people dressed in their finest clothing, eager to witness the proclamation of the Commonwealth.
It sounds remarkable. How many people showed up?
60,000 in the park itself. But estimates suggest that between 250,000 and 500,000 people lined the streets of the grand procession as it made its way from Sydney's Domain to Centennial Park.
500,000 people for a ceremony about government?
You have to understand, Ethan. For Australians, this wasn't just about government. This was the moment they became a nation. Before this day, they were colonists. After this day, they were Australians. The procession itself was spectacular. Dignitaries, soldiers, politicians, and civic leaders paraded through the streets. Bands played, people cheered.
What a moment that must have been. Everyone united in that one day.
When the procession reached Centennial Park, the crowds gathered around a specially constructed pavilion. This pavilion was the focal point of the entire ceremony. It was ornate, decorated, impressive. It stood 14 meters high, it was octagonal, and it was covered entirely in decorative plaster work.
The pavilion made of plaster. The material you said was like cake decorating?
Exactly, fibrous plaster of Paris. It had been specially constructed for this one ceremony. Inside the pavilion, builders had placed a stone obelisk, the Commonwealth stone made of polished granite. This stone had 6 sides, one to represent each of the 6 states that were now united.
So the stone itself was a symbol of unity? 6 parts becoming one?
Precisely. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Lord Hopetoun, the first Governor-General of Australia, was sworn into office. Edmund Barton, the leader of the Federation movement and Australia's first Prime Minister, took the oath of office, and the first federal cabinet was sworn in.
Who was Edmund Barton? Why was he chosen to be the first Prime Minister?
Edmund Barton was a lawyer and politician from New South Wales. He had dedicated the last 10 years of his political career to the Federation movement. He was the acknowledged leader, the Federalist, the visionary who guided 6 colonies toward unity.
Did he become prime minister right away, or was that decided through an election?
He was appointed provisionally on December 31st, 1900. There was actually a minor confusion. The first Governor-General, Lord Hopetoun, initially asked William Lyne, the Premier of New South Wales, to form the government, but Lyne couldn't put together a ministry. So Hopetoun turned to Barton, who was able to assemble a cabinet and take office.
So Barton was kind of a backup choice at first?
In a sense, yes, but Barton had such credibility as the Federation leader that he quickly became indispensable. As Barton was sworn in, the Queen's proclamation was read aloud to the assembled crowds. A 21-gun salute was fired, banners were raised, and Australians celebrated the moment they became a nation.
I can almost imagine it. All those people watching history happen right in front of them.
But that ceremony was just the beginning. The work of actually creating a functioning federal government was just starting. The first federal election was held on March the 29th and 30th, 1901. The first federal parliament opened on May 9th, 1901, in Melbourne in the Exhibition Building.
Wait, Melbourne? I thought the first ceremony was in Sydney?
The proclamation of federation was in Sydney, but the actual location of the first parliament was Melbourne. The Duke of Cornwall and York, who later became King George V, represented the king and opened Parliament in a ceremony attended by 12,000 guests. The Duke processed to Parliament House in Spring Street, where each House of Parliament met to elect its officers. And with that ceremony, the machinery of the new nation began to turn.
So the Federation was proclaimed on New Year's Day, but Parliament didn't actually open until May. That's a gap of several months.
Yes, there was a transition period. The Governor-General, the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet were in place, but the elected Parliament hadn't yet been chosen. The first federal Parliament was unlike anything Australia had ever seen. Of the 111 members, 87 had previously served in colonial parliaments. It It was as if the colonial governments were being transformed into a federal government with remarkable continuity of leadership.
What about the opposition, the people who didn't want federation?
There was always a debate, but by 1901, the strongest opposition had been overcome or accommodated through the constitutional compromises. Of course, there were other contentious issues that the new federal government had to address immediately: women's suffrage, defense, and one policy that would define Australia for the next 70 years, the White Australia policy.
The White Australia policy? I've heard that phrase before. It sounds troubling.
It is. The Immigration Restriction Act was passed on October 23, 1901. It was designed to prevent non-European migration to Australia and to define the nation as explicitly white.
That's racist. How did the first parliament allow that?
At the time, there were economic fears. Australian workers were concerned about wage competition from migrants willing to work for lower pay. There were also xenophobic attitudes that were common in that era. The Immigration Restriction Act used a dictation test. To migrate to Australia, you had to pass a test where you read and wrote 50 words in any language. But the test was deliberately designed to be nearly impossible to pass for many people, especially those from non-European countries.
So they created a law that sounded neutral, but was actually designed to exclude people based on their ethnicity?
Exactly. The White Australia policy dominated Australian immigration law for the next 70 years until the Racial Discrimination Act of 1975 finally removed these provisions.
So the moment Australia became a nation, one of their first major decisions was to make it exclusionary? That's sad.
Yes, it's an important reminder that even as we celebrate the remarkable achievement of the 6 colonies coming together as one nation, we must also acknowledge the harm that came from other policies in that same moment. Now, I want to pose a question to you. A choose-your-own-history moment. Imagine you're Edmund Barton in December 1900. You've spent the last 10 years of your life fighting for federation. You've negotiated, you've compromised, you've built consensus across 6 separate colonies.
So he finally has what he wants. Federation is about to be proclaimed.
But there's a moment of crisis. The Governor-General arrives in Sydney on December 15, 1900, and makes a request. He asks you to form the first federal government. But here's the thing. There's a prominent rival politician, William Lyne, the Premier of New South Wales, who also wants to be Prime Minister.
So there were 2 people who wanted to be the first prime minister?
Yes, and the Governor-General initially asked William Lyne to try to form a government, but Lyne couldn't assemble the support he needed. Now, here's your decision point. You're Edmund Barton. You have a choice.
What are his options?
Option 1, you could allow this government to fail completely. You could say, I won't step in. Let the new federation stumble through its first days without a proper government. That will show that you need to listen to the federation leaders, like myself.
Wait, that would be terrible. The new nation wouldn't have a government.
But I see the political logic. Barton had just spent 10 years fighting for federation. He was the obvious choice. By refusing to help when Lyne failed, he could prove his essential importance.
Exactly, Celine. Option 2 is what Barton could have done. When Lyne failed to form a government, Barton could have let the Governor-General scramble. He could have made it clear that Barton was the only man capable of leading. He could have demanded guarantees about his power and position.
But then the government would still be in chaos. People would suffer.
Option 3 is what Barton actually did. When the Governor-General couldn't form a government with Lyne, Barton stepped in immediately, without demanding concessions, without making political capital out of the situation. He simply accepted the responsibility and formed a government on December 31st, 1900.
So he put the nation's interests ahead of his own political interests?
He did, and that choice shaped Australian politics for years to come. Barton remained Prime Minister through the first federal election in March 1901, though his protectionist party actually didn't have a majority in Parliament. He governed by forming an alliance with the newly formed Australian Labor Party, which held the balance of power.
So he was willing to work with the Labor Party even though they probably had very different policies?
He was. Barton served as Prime Minister for just over 3 years, until September 1903. During that time, he helped establish the foundations of the new nation. But here's the unsung hero of this moment, the person nobody remembers.
Oh, I love when you bring this up. Who is this unsung hero?
Andrew Inglis Clark, the Tasmanian constitutional designer, the man who created the framework of the Australian Constitution, the man who blended American federal principles with British responsible government and created something entirely new.
Wait, we talked about him earlier. He drafted the Constitution.
Yes, Clark was a lawyer and constitutional expert who served on the First National Australasian Convention in 1891. His intellectual work, his ability to understand what would work for Australia, his vision of how to divide power between the center and the states, that was the foundation upon which everything else was built.
But why is he unsung if he was so important?
Because Clark spent years fighting illness and depression. He withdrew from public life. He didn't write the newspaper articles that got his name in the papers. He didn't give speeches like Henry Parkes. He didn't lead the Federation movement publicly like Edmund Barton. But without his constitutional framework, Federation would have fallen apart in the negotiating process.
So he basically did all the hard work, but nobody remembers him?
Exactly. When the Federation Pavilion was erected in Centennial Park, Andrew Inglis Clark wasn't even mentioned in the speeches. When Edmund Barton was celebrated as the Federation leader, Clark was almost forgotten. Yet, the Australia that exists today, its entire constitutional structure, is based on Clark's intellectual work.
So even in moments of triumph, the people who do the foundational work often go unrecognized. That's a pattern throughout history.
It is, and it's important to remember Andrew Inglis Clark, even if Australia didn't. Now, back to our question. Did Barton's choice to put the nation's interests first matter? Did it shape Australia's political culture?
I think it probably did. Like, if he'd been selfish and demanded stuff, it might have made people less interested in working together.
It set a precedent. The first prime minister of the nation chose unity over personal political gain. That's a powerful symbol.
Exactly. And that choice, to subordinate personal ambition to national interest, became part of the Australian political tradition. Not always followed, but always acknowledged as an ideal. So here we are, more than a century later. What is the legacy of the Federation of Australia? How does the moment of January 1st, 1901, continue to shape Australia today?
Well, the most obvious thing is that Australia still exists as a unified nation. That federation succeeded.
Yes, but it's more subtle than that. The Australian nation that was proclaimed in Centennial Park was built on the idea of unity without imposing uniformity. The Constitution allowed individual states to retain significant powers. The federal government could coordinate defense and trade, but education, health, transport remained largely state responsibilities.
So even today, each state has its own government? That still exists?
Absolutely. Australia today has 6 state governments and 2 territory governments, plus the federal government. It's a complex federal system, but it works because it was designed by Andrew Inglis Clark to balance central power with state autonomy.
And the compromises they made to get those states to agree to federation, did those continue to matter?
In some ways, yes. The Braddon Clause's 10-year limit eventually expired, and there have been ongoing tensions about revenue sharing. But the principle that smaller and regional states deserve protection from being overwhelmed by the larger states, that principle is embedded in the Australian Constitution to this day.
Did the Federation change Australian culture? Like, did people start thinking of themselves as Australians instead of New South Welshmen or Victorians?
That's a fascinating question. The short answer is gradually, not overnight. Some people, especially in the cities, did begin to identify as Australian, but regional identities remain very strong. And that tension between local loyalty and national identity is still part of Australian culture today.
Did the Federation actually succeed in the practical ways they wanted? Like, did having a unified defense force actually make Australia safer?
It's hard to say. Australia's relative geographic isolation helped protect it far more than the unified defense force did, but the Federation did allow Australia to speak with one voice on the world stage. Australia became a nation that could negotiate treaties, sign agreements, and participate in international affairs.
What about the economic stuff? Did unifying the economy actually help people?
The elimination of tariff barriers between the colonies did help trade, but the federal government's protectionist policies, designed to protect Australian manufacturing from cheap imports, actually kept prices higher for consumers for decades. So economically, Federation was a mixed bag.
And the White Australia policy you mentioned, how did that eventually change?
The White Australia policy remained in place for 70 years. Australia didn't officially begin dismantling discriminatory immigration policies until the 1970s. It took the civil rights movement in America, the Vietnam War, and changing international standards to finally push Australia toward more inclusive immigration policies.
So even though they had all these exciting principles about unity and democracy, they still excluded people based on race?
Yes, it's a stark reminder that historical progress isn't linear. A nation can achieve something remarkable like federation while simultaneously committing moral failures elsewhere.
What about the symbol of the Federation itself? The pavilion you mentioned. Is that still celebrated in Australia?
No, here's something remarkable. The original Federation Pavilion, made of that plaster of Paris that degraded so quickly, only survived 2 years. By 1903, it had to be dismantled. The wooden frame was moved to a park in a western suburb of Sydney called Cabarita Park, where it still stands today, though stripped of its ornamental plasterwork.
So the actual pavilion is still there? People can see it?
The timber frame is still there. It's a heritage site. But in 1988, during Australia's bicentennial celebrations, a new Federation Pavilion was designed by architect Alexander Tsanas and erected in the original location in Centennial Park. This new pavilion surrounds and protects the original Commonwealth stone.
So modern Australia built a new pavilion to honor the old pavilion? That's quite a tribute.
The new pavilion is circular, representing unity. Inside, the Commonwealth stone, the six-sided granite obelisk that symbolized the union of 6 colonies, is displayed under the dome. And above, in the dome itself, is a remarkable mosaic artwork by Emmett Tillers that captures different moments of Australian history.
Do people actually go visit it? Or is it just a historical monument that no one thinks about?
People do visit, tourists come through, Australians reflect on the site, and here's something that connects the Federation Pavilion to modern Australian daily life. The original design of the Federation Pavilion was so iconic that when Australia's Reserve Bank designed new currency in 2016, they put an image of the Federation Pavilion on the new $5 note.
They put it on the money? So Australians see that pavilion every time they use a $5 note?
Exactly. The symbol of the moment that created Australia as a nation is now part of everyday Australian life. It's on the currency, it's a heritage site, it's in textbooks. The Federation Pavilion has become an enduring symbol of the moment Australia became a nation.
So that structure, made of temporary material that only lasted 2 years, ended up becoming one of the most iconic symbols of Australian history?
Yes, the material was temporary, but the symbol became permanent. The plaster degraded and crumbled, but the idea it represented, the unity of 6 colonies becoming one nation, that became the foundation of Australian national identity.
It's almost poetic. The structure that was literally temporary came to represent something eternal.
And that's perhaps the deepest legacy of federation. The agreement that 6 separate political entities reached on January 1st, 1901, that agreement transformed not just the structure of Australian government, but the very identity of Australians themselves. Before federation, they were colonists, citizens of 6 different British colonies. After federation, they were Australians, a single people, a single nation. Let's take a moment to recap what we've discovered today.
We started with a mystery, a temporary structure made of plaster of Paris, a pavilion that only lasted 2 years but became one of the most important symbols in Australian history.
And we discovered that it was the site where Australia was born, where Lord Hope Toon and Edmund Barton were sworn in as the first Governor-General and Prime Minister.
We learned about the decade-long journey from Henry Parkes's Tenterfield Oration in 1889 to the proclamation in Centennial Park on January 1st, 1901. We learned about the negotiations, the referendums, the constitutional compromises that had to happen for 6 separate colonies to agree to become one nation.
And we learned about Andrew Inglis Clark, the constitutional designer from Tasmania, whose intellectual work was the foundation for everything, even though he's barely remembered today.
And we learned that the symbol of federation, the pavilion, is still with us. It's on Australian $5 notes. The timber frame is preserved. The memory of that moment hasn't been forgotten.
So now we want to know what you think. What did you think about the story of federation? About the moment when 6 colonies became one nation? About the idea of political unity requiring compromise and sacrifice?
Let us know in the comments. We genuinely want to hear your perspective. Maybe you have family connections to that time. Maybe you visited Centennial Park or the original pavilion site. Maybe you have thoughts about how Federation shaped Australia in ways that still matter today.
And if you're enjoying this podcast, please make sure to follow us or subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Every story matters. Every continent has stories that deserve to be heard.
You can also sign up for our email newsletter to stay updated on new episodes and to be part of our community of history lovers.
We're already working on another incredible episode for you. It could be a story from Asia, it could be from Africa, it could be from any of the 7 continents.
You never know where history will take us next.
But before we go, I want to mention our partner, Cyprus Real Returns. And honestly, this partnership makes sense to me as a historian.
Why's that?
Throughout my career studying history, I've been fascinated by how strategic thinking creates lasting prosperity. The Roman Empire didn't build wealth through speculation, but through strategic, secured investments in infrastructure and property. Federations weren't built overnight. They required long-term planning and compromise. Cyprus Real Returns applies that same strategic wisdom today, guaranteed 6 to 12% returns on Cyprus real estate, backed 100% by the Cyprus Land Registry, with professional management handling everything.
So it's about thinking long-term?
Exactly. Smart investing builds the kind of financial security that enables what I'm passionate about, traveling to experience history firsthand.
Cyprus tourism is actually booming right now, isn't it?
4 million visitors annually. Property values are growing 7.8% per year. It's a compelling opportunity for those thinking strategically about wealth building. Visit cyprusrealreturns.com to explore how strategic investing can fund your own historical adventures. Wherever we go, whatever story we explore, remember this. History is the story of human beings coming together, sometimes in conflict, sometimes in compromise, sometimes in remarkable moments of unity like January 1st, 1901 in Centennial Park, Sydney, when 6 colonies became one nation.
And sometimes the temporary structures we build to mark those moments end up becoming the symbols that last forever.
That's so cool, actually. Like, the Plaster Pavilion was only supposed to last 1 day. It lasted 2 years. And now, more than 100 years later, we're still talking about it.
Until our next journey through time, keep history alive.